Hello and greetings to all of my viewers. So my name is Yasmin Suraya Rosli from U7, and today I'm going to do a presentation for the subject TSLB3143 Fundamentals of Research for Task 2 oral presentation, and the lecturer is Dr. Kee Li Li. Alright, so before we go into this research proposal presentation, let me introduce you to the topic of my research, which is TESL pre-service teachers' perception of implementing student-centered learning in developing students' speaking skills. Alright, so let's go into the introduction of. Before that, we are going to look at the table of contents. This presentation of the research proposal consists of 3 chapters, which is the first one, Chapter 1, Introduction, Chapter 2, Literature Review, and Chapter 3, Research Methodology. Alright, let's look at the first one, which is Chapter 1.0, Introduction. So in this introduction, it talks about the general things of the research proposal, which is it will be focusing on TESL pre-service teachers' perception of implementing student-centered learning in Year 5 ESL primary classrooms in developing student speaking skills. As we all know or might not know, student-centered learning, or we can call it as SCL, happens when the learners are responsible for their own learning instead of relying on their teachers. All right. So it actually focuses on their learning abilities, their learning needs and styles, with teachers only act as facilitators, and that the relationship between student-centered learning and speaking skills is actually relevant, as student-centered learning is able to help develop the student speaking skills using the approach. And then, if we look at this globalization era, speaking skills using the English language is considered very important because English is used commonly all around the globe, and it actually helps us to channel ideas through communication, especially in our education. All right. So in we can see that in primary and secondary school, also in tertiary education, English is considered the most important language to be mastered, as it is used in communication. And then, um, as English learners, speaking skills is one of the language skill or linguistic skills that we have to master in order to acquire the language. All right. So when a learner, an English learner, is able to master speaking skills, they are able to channel their ideas and share their thoughts using the language. All right. Um, but the issues happen when the speaking skills cannot be mastered or developed properly in the classroom. All right. So this research proposal will look further into that matter. All right. So the problem statement for this research proposal, in which in this approach as based on Baldauf and Morning 2006, teachers should change their roles in the classroom from a teller to a coordinator, and from material users to teaching materials provider. This is actually to suit the 21st century skills learning that has been put forth by our Ministry of Education in Malaysia. And student-centered learning is actually beneficial to replace teacher-centered learning approach, which is considered the traditional approach in teaching English in the classroom. And according to Shani, 1968, developing speaking skills was neglected in the past due to the misconception that speaking skills will develop naturally over time. This is actually quite true. Speaking learners can actually learn to speak using the language on their own, but they actually need the guidance in the terms of the rules of using the language instead. All right. So, relating this to the teaching or speaking, students perceive that learning to speak using the language was hard because the process of learning was presented in an old method. All right. So, in other words, the teachers use the traditional approach to teach speaking and focuses more on the teaching of the grammar and vocabulary instead of teaching on the use of the language itself in terms of speaking. All right. So, in student-centered learning, pupils are actually able to be exposed to the authentic thoughts and real-life tasks that allows them to use the language in real-life situation. All right. Next is let's look at the purpose of the study. We have one 1.3.1, the research objective to assess TESL pre-service teachers' perception of implementing student-centered learning in Year 5 ESL primary classrooms in developing student speaking skills. This is because the point of this research proposal is to find out how far TESL pre-service teachers are able to implement student-centered learning in their ESL primary classroom in developing their students' speaking skills. And the second one is to identify the frequency of speaking activities used to implement student-centered learning in developing students' speaking skills. And the research questions are two research questions. The first one is to do the TESL pre-service teachers are able to implement student-centered learning in Year 5 ESL primary classroom in developing students' speaking skills. And the second one is what are the speaking activities that can be used to implement student-centered learning in developing students' speaking skills. And as for the research hypothesis, the first one is there is a significant relationship between the implementation of student-centered learning in Year 5 ESL primary classroom with the development of students' speaking skills. And the second one is there is a significant relationship between the speaking activities used to implement student-centered learning with the development of students' speaking skills. All right, we are done with the purpose of the study. Next, we will look at our 1.4, which is the scope and limitations of the study. So actually, the study focuses on TESL pre-service teachers' perception of implementing student-centered learning in Year 5 ESL primary classroom in developing student speaking skills, in which the data collection will be conducted to 140 out of 217 total population of TESL pre-service teachers from PISMP June 2019 from Institute of Teacher Education in Malaysia. All right, it does not limit to our IPG book, and the TESL pre-service teachers from other intakes are not within the scope of this research, and it will not cover the other perceptions are related to the student-centered learning in developing student speaking skills, and this study is actually will be conducted through the use of questionnaire that will be spreaded to the TESL pre-service teachers that will be involved in the survey. All right. Next, we will look at the significance of the study. So, the study will be beneficial to help TESL pre-service teachers and TESL teachers to gain clear insight on how to implement student-centered learning with their students to develop their speaking skills better. This is because some of the teachers actually does not have a full understanding of what is student-centered learning approach and how to actually implement the approach effectively in their ESL classroom. And then the previous teachers, and educators will be able to utilize the student-centered learning approach in their teaching and learning with the students to replace the traditional approach, which is the teacher-centered learning approach. All right. So next we will look at the operational definitions included in this research proposal, and the first one is the TESL pre-service teachers. So according to Johnson 1994 and Karakati and Chile 2012, pre-service teachers refer to the similar notion of student teachers, training teachers, or practicing teachers like the students in Institute of Teacher Education in Malaysia. And then, in this context of the study, TESL pre-service teachers are undergraduate teacher students from PSMP June 2019, majoring in teaching English as second language. And then the second one is the perception. So according to McDonald 2012, perception is actually the way an individual views the world and involved within. And in this study, perception actually means the researcher seeks for perceptions of implementing student-centered learning in developing speaking skills in Year 5 as a primary classroom students from a TESL pre-service teachers. All right, next is the definition of student-centered learning. Student-centered learning, or SCL, is actually a model where students are placed at the core of the learning process, with teacher acting as mere facilitators to actually help the pupils to reach their aim and objective in learning, aiming at providing them with authentic need-based instruction, cooperative and collaborative learning through an active, democratic and child-friendly approach, which is a concept comparatively reverse or in contrast to the traditional teaching pedagogy. And then the last one is speaking skills, which is based on Shyama 2006. Speaking is one of the language skills in which learners can communicate with others using the language to express their thoughts and to achieve certain goals. And in speaking skills in this study refer to the student's ability to communicate in real life and authentic tasks using the student-centered learning approach using the targeted language. All right. So that's the end of the chapter one. So in summary, this chapter actually introduced the general information and general idea of the study, of that covers the topic of the research, problem statement, and defines the purpose of the study. And the scope and limitations are also included in this chapter. The significance of the study and operational definition of the terms used throughout this research. Next, we will go into the second chapter, which is the literature review. All right. So, the implementation of student-centered learning, the development of student speaking skills, and speaking activities used to implement student-centered learning were selected to be the variables of this study. Actually, in this study, student-centered learning refers to an approach that replaces the traditional um, traditional lectures with active learning, group learning, and self-learning, and it actually encourages the students to be responsible for their education to become lifelong learners instead of spoon-fed learners, according to Sunanayake et al. 2015. So, in other words, student-centered learning allows the pupils to be more involved in their learning and be more responsible of their learning instead of relying on their teachers. So, student-centered learning can actually be practiced in education, especially in our English classroom, right? So, speaking actually refers to the ability of a speaker to use the language to engage in oral communication, to communicate messages, information, and to convey thoughts. And however, in the English language, speaking skills actually outweigh the other three language skills, which are listening, reading, and writing, because we actually use the language we actually speak every day. Like we use the language to speak and communicate with others. So actually, speaking is actually the most major skill that needs to be mastered by the students. And then in terms of learning the language, the learners have to acquire the language and it is actually difficult for them to acquire the language because they need to be proficient in terms of pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, comprehension, and fluency. All right. Next, we will look at the context of this study. For this survey research, the researcher has used her experience during her phase one practicum to survey the implementation of student-centered learning in ESL primary classroom by TESL quiz teacher, especially in the year 5 classroom. And based on the researcher's experience, it has been found that it was difficult to implement student-centered learning in the teaching and learning process, especially when teaching speaking. Thus, the researcher wanted to conduct this survey to find out the perceptions of other service teachers in implementing student-centered learning in their 5 ESL primary classroom to develop speaking skills. This is because the researcher found out that to implement student-centered learning approach in an ESL classroom, primary classroom is actually very challenging because we have to meet a few difficulties in order to reach the learning objective using the approach. Next, we will look at the research theory related to this research survey research. There are three related research theory. The first one is constructivist learning theory by Jean Piaget, and um, Piaget's theory actually supports student-centered learning based on his observation of how children construct knowledge and meaning cognitively through new interactions um, and experiences in contrast to memorization. As we all know, this theory actually asserts that learners construct knowledge instead of acquiring new knowledge. And then the learning process become active through the learner's environment and experiences. Okay. And next is the zone proximal development theory by Lev Vygotsky. And the concept talks about the exposure of the social nature of learning, where it actually reveals that the distance between what learners can achieve on their own, their actual development, and what can they achieve with the help of others, are known as MKO, which is the more knowledgeable others. And in the student-centered learning approach, students are actually active learners and the teacher acts as a facilitator in aiding the students in their learning. And the third theory is acquisition learning hypothesis by Krashen's theory, where the acquisition learning hypothesis is one of Krashen's five hypotheses in the theory, and it is actually considered the most fundamental in this theory. And then to relate this to this study, speaking skills are actually mastered through both acquisition and learning system, where student-centered learning happens when the acquisition took place as the inductive approach in acquiring the language. And next, we will look at the findings of past studies. According to teachers' roles and identities in student-centered classroom by a research by Keller 2018, it was stated in the study that students who are taking an active role in learning process demonstrate the development of 21st century skills rather than passive learners who are totally depending for information from their teacher. All right. So it is said that effective implementation of student-centered learning could happen if the teachers are able to understand their roles and responsibilities in the teaching and learning process by implementing and integrating constructivist and inquiry-based instruction. And according to Velisis and Kamako 2017, learner-centered instruction can be an approach to develop the speaking skills in English, because in this study it has been mentioned that the traditional approach, which is the teacher-centered learning, is no longer suitable to be implemented. And in this modernization era, and it is not actually working for new generations. So to it is also stated that the relationship between learner-centered instructions with the speaking skill is relevant. Okay, so and also according to the most recent study related to this research topic is the research on improving speaking skills in English through a student-centered approach in third semester students of modern language program at University of Calca by Pantoja 2020. And it actually focuses on how teachers should switch the teaching and learning process from teacher-centered learning approach to student-centered learning approach to improve the students' speaking proficiency. However, what I have noticed from this research, the study was conducted among university students, in which there is much differences from the study, which covers year 5 ESL primary classrooms. And the last one is the research conducted by Finza Larasati 2018 on how student-centered learning can be an approach to teaching speaking in EFL classroom, where it actually talks about the same thing as the previous studies that I have mentioned, but however, it does not cover the perception of the implementation of the approach in the classroom and also the frequency of the speaking activity use. Thus, the researchers' study it will be done to fulfill the main gaps of these previous studies to provide better information to the readers regarding the topic. So now I'm going to show you the conceptual framework of this research proposal. And we have a two section, which is the independent variable and the dependent variable. So the dependent variable is developing student speaking skills, and the independent variables are implementing student-centered learning and speaking activities use. So this it, there are relationship between dependent and independent variable, in which will be proven through this research. All right. So the summary for chapter 2. This chapter actually digs deeper into the study that will be conducted by researcher. The literature review, research theory, findings of past studies, and the conceptual framework act as overviews for a clear picture of the study, which focuses on the deeper meaning of both dependent and independent variables. It consists of theories and previous studies that support the main aim of this study. Next, we will look at chapter 3, which covers research methodology. So let's look at the introduction. Um, a survey research design actually will be used in this study, which involves a collection of information from the targeted population, which are the pre-service teachers. So the data collected will be analyzed and extracted, and comparisons will be made. All right. So according to Cohen and Mannion 1994, the aim of conducting a survey is to seek data with the intention of describing the nature and state of existing conditions, and it actually helps in our education field. And the targeted population of this research is pre-service teachers, and the sampling will be taken from pre-service teachers of VI sample TESL June 2019 from the Institute of Teacher Education all over Malaysia. And the data collection for this study involved a self-completion questionnaire by the respondents that will be administered through a Google form, as it will be done online. All right, next we will look at the research design. So for this research, the researcher uses a quantitative strategy in this study by applying a survey design, and the TESL pre-service teachers will be provided with a questionnaire used through a Google form to assess their perception of implementing student-centered learning in Year 5 VSL primary classroom in developing student speaking skills. And Through this research, the relationship between the implementation of student-centered learning with the development of student speaking skills will be determined at the end of the study. So next we will look at the sampling of this research. So the population of this research is actually with a total of 217 PISMP TESL June 2019 pre-service teachers from Institute of Teacher Education in Malaysia. However, not all of the Institute of Teacher Education in Malaysia, all over Malaysia, consist of TESL, PSMP TESL June 2019. So based on my findings, there are only five Institute of Teacher Education that offers a TESL for this intake, which are Institute of Education Ipoh Campus, Tuanku Bainun, Gaya, Datuk Razali Ismail, and Bahasa Antarabangsa, and the total of them is 217. And out of 217, only 140 pre-service teachers will be taken from the population. All right. So next, we will look at the research instruments that will be used in this research. So this study will be using a quantitative questionnaire to obtain data on TESL pre-service teachers' perception of implementing student-centered learning in Year 5 ESL primary classroom in developing student speaking skills. And the questionnaire will be is consists of three sections, which are section A, B, and C, in which each of the respective sections aims to collect data, different data from the respondents. And the questionnaire is also produced using the Likert scale, which helps to define the range of attitude or satisfaction from the respondents. And the researcher has adapted and adopted the questionnaire from various sources related to the survey research. Next, we will look at the validity and the reliability of the research instruments. So for this study, the researcher has obtained validation from Dr. Kamarudin Ilyas from the Research and Innovation Department of Institute of Teacher Education Info Campus. This is because it is to ensure that the instrument that will be administered to the respondents measures what it is designed to measure according to Robson 2011. Um, and it was given to be validated by an expert who has an extensive knowledge in the field and experienced in conducting researches. And in terms of the reliability, the test reliability is used to assess the external consistency, repeatability, trustworthiness, precision of a research um, of the instrument. Right, and it functions to indicate any errors or biases across the items in the instruments before it is administered to the respondents. And based on SIP and Wright 2005, if R equals to 0.8, 0.98, the reliability coefficient is high and free from measurement errors. Next, we will look at the pilot study. So basically, for this research proposal, the researcher has actually conducted a pilot study in order to test the instruments of the questionnaire, whether whether it achieves the validity and the reliability. So according to Pilot Beck and Hungler 2001, a pilot study actually refers to a small scale or trial run to prepare for the major study. And for this research, the researcher has spreaded the questionnaire randomly to the TESL pre-service teachers from Institute of Teacher Education in Malaysia who are not from the study sampling, which is actually except for PSMP TESL June 2019. And after the researcher has gained the data and the instrument then was improved based on the analysis from the pilot study when the validity and the reliability is achieved. Next, we will look at the planning of data collection of this research. Um, Step one is producing data collection instrument, where a standardized questionnaire is actually produced to be given to the sample participants, which consists of 15 questions from in three sections: Section A, Section B, and Section C, and it is constructed based on the Likert scale, which is scored along the range, where the scale of 1 equals to fully disagree, 2 equals to disagree, 3 equals to agree, and 4 equals to fully disagree. And for this questionnaire, the participants have to answer all of the questions. Right, for step 2, administering data collection, conducting a survey, where the questionnaire will actually be distributed to the sample participants through Google Form, and they will be answering the questionnaire online. And the questionnaire will be included with the aim of the survey and instructions on how to complete the questionnaire, and it helps the sample participants to check their responses, and then their responses will be collected after a few days. And then step 3 is to manage the data entry, where the data entry will be actually collected from Google Form results and will be set up in the Microsoft Excel. And next, we will look at the planning of data analysis method, which consists of step 1 and step 2, where step 1, an analysis will be produced based on the data collected from the sample participants, and the analysis conducted will be in a separate sheet in the data entry file, and the survey results will be analyzed and interpreted. The data will be analyzed with using SPSS to obtain the descriptive scores of the questionnaire items based on the responses from the participants, and to produce the summated variable of the constructs regarding the TESL pre-service teachers' perception of implementing student-centered learning in Year 5 ESL primary classroom in developing student speaking skills. And then the descriptive analysis of the data will be showing the mean score and standard deviation for each questionnaire items, which allows the researcher to write a description of the data. All right. So for step 2, a report of the findings will be generated in graphs and tables based on the interpreted result for descriptive static and inferences that can be drawn from the inferential statistic, which includes the counting of mean, median, variance, and standard deviation, maximum and minimum score based on the data obtained from the questionnaire. In contrast, inferential statistics involve normal distribution, t-test, and effect size. And it actually helps to determine whether or not that there is a significant relationship between the implementation of student-centered learning in Year 5 ESL primary classroom in developing students' speaking skills. So the summary for this chapter 3 is uh, the survey research is actually improved through this pilot study conducted before the real research is conducted, and then it actually enhances the researcher's validity and reliability of the research instruments before it will be used in the future. And then the procedure on details of this survey research is also revealed in this chapter, so that it will run smoothly when it uh, is conducted. All right, so next we will continue with the Q&A session, and there are 5 questions for this session. And let's look at the first one. The first question is, how do you feel in your traditional classroom setting with teacher-centered learning approach is implemented? Okay, so in a traditional classroom setting with a teacher-centered learning approach is implemented, we can see that the students has a low opportunity to have an active responsible to be responsible in their own learning, and they will not have a chance to have an active learning, and they will not have the opportunity to be exposed to the real life and authentic tasks in using the language. So in a traditional classroom setting, where the implementation of teacher-student centered learning happens, the teacher actually plays a main role in guiding the pupils. And when the teacher becomes plays the active role in the teaching and learning process, the students will play the passive role in their learning. So I think that this is not actually effective in helping them to develop their speaking skills. All right, next is the second question is, what are the differences between student-centered learning approach and teacher-centered learning approach? All right, so basically, student-centered learning approach is actually an approach that allows the pupils to be an active learner and be responsible in their own learning, because where they can actually look on how they progress in their own learning instead of relying on their teacher for information materials to support their learning. uh, where teacher-centered learning approach, uh, the teacher actually plays a huge role in the classroom, where they play an active role, and in contrast, their students will play a passive role. So, in teacher-centered learning approach, the pupils will be spoon-fed by the teacher in terms of the materials in the teaching and learning process, in terms of the information. So the learning also both in both approaches, learning happens, but in terms of the effectiveness, there is a differences. Okay, so for question 3, how does role play helps to implement student-centered learning to develop speaking skills? So in my opinion, role play actually helps to implement student-centered learning to develop their speaking skills, because role play allows the pupils to actually use the language verbally to fulfill the task. So, for example, if the students are given a situation like they have to be like a tour guide, and they have to actually give directions to a tourist. So they when they role play using the situation, they are actually able to acquire the language verbally using the rules of the English language, and they also actually will be able to use and apply the language what they have learned you during the role play to be applied in their real life situation. Okay, because what happens, for example, what happens in the situation can actually happens to them in their real life. Okay, so I think your role play actually helps to implement student-centered learning to develop speaking skills, where they can actually use the language independently and develop their speaking skills at the same time. All right. For the fourth question is, in your opinion, as future English teacher, is it difficult to implement this approach in the ESL primary classroom? All right. In my opinion, as a future English teacher, I think that it is quite difficult to implement this approach in the ESL primary classroom, but it doesn't mean that we can't. There are a few things that we can do to overcome the difficulties in applying student-centered learning in the ESL primary classroom to develop student speaking skills, because it is obvious that this approach really helps to improve learning of speaking skills among the students, and it can actually this approach is very important to actually prepare the students to use the language instead of just relying on their teachers um, to actually maneuver the teaching and learning process. And as for the fifth question, do you encounter any problems in completing this research proposal? To answer this question, as a researcher, yes, I do encounter any problems in completing this research proposal, especially in gaining the respondents for my pilot study. As we all know, that survey survey needs to be done by collecting data from respondents. So what the challenges that I face is that on the difficulty to collect that to collect data collect responses from the respondents, because there is a very little cooperation received from the respondents. This is might be because the pilot study maybe should have been done earlier, so that this problem could be actually overcome better. But in the end, I actually managed to gain the sufficient number of respondents, and I think that is one of the problems that I have faced in order to conduct this research proposal. So I think that's all for this presentation. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and that's all from me for today. Thank you for listening, and see you again. Thank you.